Welcome to the Military Spouse Careers and Business Podcast, your source for in-depth information all about the job application, negotiation, transitioning, education processes, and the unique challenges and overcoming of those challenges experienced by military spouses. You'll hear inspiring stories from military spouses all over the world who have found a way to make their career work for them and not take a back seat. Thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome back to the Military Spouse Careers and Business Podcast. I'm here today with another inspiring guest who's going to talk to you about how she navigated her career, even though there may have been some challenges there with traditional employment and wanting to maintain a job where she's active in the same career field that she always wanted to be in. So welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria Adams. I am a family nurse practitioner. I have been in healthcare for over a decade, actually bordering 2 decades at this point, and I have been a military spouse for 6 years, and I've been with my husband hitting on 10 years this year. And I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. So it sounds like you kind of starting your career in this field and meeting your now husband were relatively close together. Was there ever a moment when you kind of realized that things would look different for you as a military spouse? And did you have any fears around that when you first came to that realization?
Yes, absolutely. I was on track to become a nurse practitioner in New York. And while I was in grad school, I met my husband. I was working at the time in the hospital as a registered nurse, and I had a little bit of a different career path set for myself before I met my husband. But this is life, and it doesn't always happen the way you plan it. So I kind of expected things to change, and I was expecting to have to roll with the punches, but not quite to the extent that I had to.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. You know, you work in medicine and healthcare, which I think for a lot of people, it kind of reminds me of teachers or other types of careers where you may need to be registered or, you know, have a specific license to do something that may change from one state to another. Were there any immediate impacts from knowing that you'd have to move a lot that you felt as a military spouse? Was there any concern over, okay, I'm going to struggle, I'm going to have downtime in between when I do have jobs? I'm just sort of curious how you approach that in general.
So I'm the type of personality that likes to have everything planned, which really doesn't work with the military lifestyle. I learned very quickly. However, what I did was I tried to plan as far in advance as I could, and I actually created a binder with potential duty stations that we would end up at, and what my license requirements would be in each state and how long it would take, what the cost of each license would be, what the job market is. And for nurse practitioners specifically, it's a little bit of a different issue because some states are full practice authority, meaning that you can practice from start to finish without needing a physician's input. Other states are a little bit more restricted. And then you have the fully restricted states where sometimes you have to have a physician present in the office that you're practicing in. So it was a lot to take into consideration when we were trying to decide where we were moving. And I'm very fortunate to have a husband who's very supportive of my career. I'm very proud. And he really worked with me on putting his priority stations kind of, you know, it was a balance between what he wanted and what I could get out of my career.
I love that you were both on the same page about things and trying to navigate how do we make this work. And I love the idea of the binder too, because that's where I think I would get tripped up. Okay, what is required by this one state? And I don't know if your experience was like this, but I feel like every time we got new orders, it was a 5-minute phone call. They would call my husband and go, you can go here or here. Tell us in the next hour, you have to decide. And then we would be like, okay, it was usually not any of the billets that we were expecting. And so there would be this hurried call from him at work, like, okay, here's one that's bad, but this other one seems worse. So which one of the two do you want to go to? And you'd have to adapt super fast and make these big, huge life decisions about where you were going to live for the next year to 3 years. So I love that you were really, really organized about that. Did it ever come up with employers that you were a military spouse? There's a big kind of controversial thing around, should you say you're a military spouse and just be, you know, out with it? Do some employers discriminate against it? So I'm curious how you approached that when you were applying to new jobs when you did land in a new place.
That is an excellent question. And I see this asked all the time on forums, if someone should disclose about their lifestyle. And it's kind of seen as this big plague. I'm a military spouse, so employers are going to figure out that I won't be here for more than 1 to 3 years. And I really wish the mentality would shift. And in a lot of places it has. A lot of employers now understand that the work culture has changed anyway. There are people who are living in the same area for 20 years and they decide to change jobs after 1 or 5 years, just because that was their choice at that point in life. So the military spouses are really no different. What I like to do is let the conversation flow when it comes to an interview. I was fortunate to make the decision and shift priorities from in-office practice to telemedicine. So when I made that shift, which was pretty big when I was being interviewed and I was being asked, well, why are you have this long career in urgent care as a nurse practitioner, why do you want to do telemedicine now? And I was very honest. I said, listen, the military is making us move everywhere. I need a job that's going to be stable that I can take with me. And I'm going to take this opportunity and see if telemedicine works for me.
Oh, wow. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that goes into this when it comes to careers for military spouses. Do you have advice for people who are in the healthcare industry or other nurse practitioners? Any tips or things you learned along the way that you kind of wish you would have known when you started?
Let your work speak for itself. Do not put yourself in the mindset that I'm leaving this job in 3 years so I don't have to care. Even if you spend 6 months at a job, it's really important to leave a lasting impression because you never know when that person's going to show up again in your life. You don't know when you might need a reference from them or when you might end up hiring that person. I worked at a company for 6 months and it was not a good fit for me. And now I'm trying to recruit someone that I did orientation with at that time. I'm trying to recruit them for my team.
See, that's a really good lesson because I work with a lot of freelancers and I always tell them never burn bridges unless you absolutely have to. And you really never need to. Even if someone was absolutely awful, it's really not even worth the effort to try to tell them how awful they were. So there's no need to burn any bridges, even if a situation doesn't work out for you. And I think that brings up a really good point because a lot of spouses, it's easy to feel like we're just lucky to get anything, right? So how did you build the confidence to say, I've been in this position for 6 months. It's not really working for me. And was that like a leap of faith for you to take, kind of hoping that you would find something else?
It was the absolute biggest leap of faith I had to take in my career. The way I saw it was my mental health was declining rapidly during this particular job. And my husband noticed it. All my friends and family noticed it. And I was starting to not feel like myself. And I said, this is not something that is for me. And yeah, I'm a military spouse. Yes, this will look bad on my resume, but it will be a lot worse if I'm in a mental health situation where my job will start to take a hit. My day-to-day practice or, my patients will notice that I'm not happy. And I for one, I love my patients. I'm very transparent with them. I love providing patient care. And I didn't want it to come off to my patients that I hate my job or hate my practice. So I really did take a big leap of faith, and my current job quite literally fell into my laptop.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a cute little saying too. I agree with you a lot about sometimes you're in a job situation and you feel like you need to keep pushing, but you're really the only one who feels that way. I left a career. I used to teach 7th grade in Baltimore City public schools, and I was just absolutely burned out, exhausted, drained at the end of every single day. And my now husband and my mom were both at the time like, please quit, Laura, please leave. And I'm like, I can't abandon these kids. And my husband kind of pointed out, he's like, do you really think you're bringing your best self to work when you are completely and totally drained? Like, they deserve to have a teacher who this really lights up this teacher's life to work in this particular environment. And that isn't you. So you've got to liberate yourself a little bit and think about, sometimes it helps to get that clarity of, all right, this is actually could potentially negatively affect my work, or it already is. So if you're having trouble pulling yourself out of that situation, I imagine there's a similar thing with people. My husband's a physician, so I'm pulling on that too. For when you work in an environment where you who help people, right? Like teacher, nurse, doctor, paramedic. It's easy to feel like it's very hard to walk away from those kinds of positions, I feel like, because it's a job and you get paid for it, but it's also a service and it requires a particular type of person to thrive there, making it hard to quit. That was the hardest thing for me when I walked away from teaching, was just the students. I was like, who's going to explain this to them? Like that sort of thing. So I love
Absolutely.
that you talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I a big piece of advice that I like to give military spouses is, just because you're married to someone who's in the military does not make you more worthless. It does not bring down your value. You are who you are, regardless of who you married. So if you're a driven person, you're a driven person who's married. If you are motivated, you're a motivated person with 3 children. Being married to the military is a big driver of what happens in the grand scheme of things in life, but it doesn't change the core of who you are and what your work values should be.
Mm-hmm. I actually think, too, that a lot of military spouses bring some really unique soft skills to the job. And I think a lot of times we're told to downplay certain things, or, you're in that question of, should I say that I'm a military spouse or not? If you're in an environment where you can bring that up, or it's an employer who says we are actively wanting to hire people from the military and veteran community, there's a lot of soft skills that you gain as a military spouse: adaptability, communication, organization, details. Like there's just collaborating. Like there's so many
patience.
Things. Yeah, patience. Living in chaos, right? Like you can adapt to just about anything, because I always get mad. Like when employers, they still ask this question and I still have the same answer. What's your 5-year plan? And I was like, you know what? When I met my husband, I was totally a 5, 10, 15-year plan person. Being a military spouse, I had to let that go. I maybe have a 6-month to a year plan at the max.
Absolutely.
Because I can't think like that anymore. Like, yes, there's things I want to achieve in my life, but it's totally okay that your life just looks a little different. But don't forget, you do bring some really powerful things to the table that can really contribute to a company or team because of your unique experience of what you live on a day-to-day life. Yeah.
Right. And interviewing is a two-way street. When you speak to a company, if you feel like they won't support you and their culture is not what works for you, you don't have to take the job. If you're going for a career, it's not just about the paycheck. There's so much that's involved in that. It's so important to find a good culture at your workplace, because you're spending a lot of time there. And if it doesn't work for you, it'll lead back down to that path of toxicity.
Yeah, culture really is a two-way thing. A lot of companies screen for it when they're hiring employees, but I think one of the biggest mistakes that people in general make when they're going through the hiring process is they don't ask enough questions. I've been on the hiring side enough now to say, what questions do you have for me? And if the person only has like one question and it's about something stupid, like how do we accumulate vacation time? I'm like, okay, don't you have, like, how do we work as a team, right? I'm part of a remote team. What is the vibe? How do we have work-life balance? What do we do for fun? You want to make sure that this is an actual culture that you not only are willing to work in, but that you actually want to work in as part of the company. So I love that you talk about those clues that you can pull from the way that a company either positions the job or interviews you, so you can make that call about, is this really the right fit for me?
Absolutely. And as someone who just started interviewing providers for her team, I can say that we are looking for questions, and we're looking to see what type of questions you're asking. We're looking to see what your general attitude is, what your demeanor is. These are big verbal and nonverbal cues to see if you're a good fit for our company. And you might have an excellent resume, but if we see that your demeanor doesn't match what we're looking for our patients, then that might be a huge deterrent for us. And not in a bad way, it's just not a fit for our company. So we're looking, ask questions. If you have a question, don't be shy, ask the question. This is your livelihood. You're giving your time, you're giving your experience, your skill set. So you have every right to ask every question in the book.
Great point. And people don't leverage this enough. I mean, just spend time before the interview coming up with all of the potential questions that you have, and then maybe make yourself feel a little bit better about it by kind of formatting them. Or what I would like to do is I would have like a sticky note on my computer that would just have like words that would remind me to ask those particular questions, so that it wouldn't seem like I was reading anything, but also so that I could remember to get that really important question in, because that is important. Culture is huge. And I think more and more, there's a lot of studies that are coming out that a paycheck is still important to a lot of people, but for a lot of especially younger employees, the work culture, the benefits, the professional development, the team style, all of those things are just as, if not more important than the earnings itself. So don't underestimate it.
Absolutely.
It can have such a big impact on your life. Now, I want to talk about that in the context of working remotely. You do telemedicine. What were the biggest differences as a nurse practitioner that you noticed, well, if there were any, between working in a more traditional role and then going into telemedicine?
The transition was pretty tremendous. It took a lot of, I started telemedicine back in 2018. When it wasn't quite as mainstream as it is now. COVID has propelled telemedicine front and center. But back then it was very kind of considered auxiliary or an option for people who don't want real medical care. It was seen as kind of the ugly stepchild, really not promoted in a good light. So it took a lot of teaching myself how to become a telemedicine provider when it comes to the technical aspects of it, doing a physical exam. Most importantly, it was making the patients feel comfortable with the fact that I'm a licensed provider, I have experience. Just because you're sitting in front of your phone doesn't mean that you're not going to get medical care. So that art of having that discussion with patients and making them feel comfortable, I think, was the most important component, versus the technical aspects of me sitting in my living room. I actually kind of use that to my advantage now. I'll make a joke when a patient asks me something and they feel nervous. I like to break the ice and be like, hey, listen, I'm wearing pajama pants right now. We're good. Don't be nervous. We're fine. And that tends to break the ice with the patients. And then I'll go into explaining the medical portion of the visit. So this way they see that, I'm a human being too. Yeah, you're nervous about what's going on and you feel weird because you're doing it from your phone. Well, I'm sitting in my pajamas in front of my laptop, but our brains are still the same. We're still the same people. It's just a little bit of an adjustment. And it's been working really well. I have a really great set of patients right now. I work at an excellent, amazing company. So I was really able to thrive in this environment.
You're absolutely right. There's been such a shift in terms of the perception of telemedicine. I do think you're right. In the past, it was kind of seen as like ugly stepsister. Like it wasn't really trusted as much. And now that we've been in the pandemic, as a patient, I find it to be hugely helpful. Oh, great. I don't always have to drive to my doctor's office, struggle to find a parking place. They're trying to cram me into a schedule. I'm sitting in the waiting room for potentially 2 hours. As a patient, I find it to be great for a lot of things. Now, there's some things where you definitely do need to be in an office or in an emergency room or in a surgery room, any of that. But a lot of times you can get an amazing experience. I mean, I was in a car accident this September, and this was the first time I'd ever done physical therapy in my life. But of course, it was virtual physical therapy. And when they signed me up for it, I'm like, this is not going to work. Like, how do you do physical therapy in my basement on the phone with the therapist? It was actually a really great experience. And the only thing that I think really changed was we had to reposition the phone. And he would be like, all right, I suggest putting your phone on the floor for this one, because I really need to see where your neck is laying as you're flat on your back. And so there's a lot of things you can still accomplish meeting with somebody virtually. Can you talk a little bit about having the right environment to be productive when you're working from home for those spouses who might be thinking about going after a remote career?
Yeah, my first piece of advice would be to be mindful of the fact that you're still working. A lot of people who want to work from home have the impression that, I'm at home, so it's really not that much work, or it's somewhat flexible, especially in telehealth where you have set clinical hours. It's definitely not the case. You need to set time aside. If you have a special workspace that you can use that. I sit in my living room because this is where I get good natural light and it makes me happy. I used to work downstairs where there was less natural light and I wasn't feeling as good. So pick an area that works well for you, a nice quiet area where you can focus and concentrate on your work. And your best bet is to ask your company. A lot of companies have programs, have support for people who are transitioning to working from home. They have senior staff who can help you with tips and tricks because each company is so different. So I would say ask your company, ask a colleague, like, hey, what are you doing? This particular aspect of my job isn't working. What works for you? And we were having a discussion the other day of backgrounds that the patients can see us on and what works and what doesn't and who likes what. And someone uses a blue screen and I use my actual living room, but you can only see a vase of flowers in a medical book. Everyone's a little bit different, but it was good feedback to give to someone who's new coming on board and they didn't know if there was a right answer to that question. And they just wanted feedback from other people. So use your resources. You're working from home, but you still have coworkers.
Yes, I love that. And sometimes it's so silly because we get in our own ruts of what we think we have to do. I noticed one of my struggles that I had when I first started working remotely in a full-time situation was I wasn't taking lunch. Like something about, past in-office jobs, there's a very clear demarcation of it's lunchtime. People get up, they physically leave, they go to the kitchen. And I noticed working remotely that I just never took lunch. And my boss was like, all right, so let's just go block your calendar off right now for lunch. And you're going to get a reminder to go to lunch because it really was as simple as that. Like I just was letting my calendar kind of be overtaken. And then I would realize too late, oh, I don't even have any time to take a break to go eat something. So definitely ask your coworkers because there's lots of great advice and different ways that people have adapted to things. Another one for me that I got advice from other people about was going to a convertible desk that would allow me to sit as well as to stand. And I was like, What tips do you all have for adjusting to a standing desk? Because I know I'm not going to be able to go 9 hours the first few days standing up. And that was really helpful to get someone's perspective on, oh yeah, like you want to switch an hour on, an hour off. You want to have a really good mat that you can stand on and kind of build your way up into having that endurance. So using your resources is super smart. Was there anything about your career journey or working in telemedicine that caught you by surprise when you first started doing it?
Surprise. I think everything was a surprise because I was actually reluctant to go into telehealth. I had been working in urgent care, thriving, loving it. And I decided that I had to make the career change in order for me to be able to advance in my career. I was just hopping from one office to another and didn't have that opportunity for advancement. So the surprise came from me where I decided to go into telemedicine and choosing a company that worked with my values and my career mission. And the surprise for me was the fact that there were so many companies out there that did not align with my mission and values, and finding those few companies that did work with me were very pleasant surprises. I really got some good experiences. Every day is a surprise, I'll be honest. In my current role, I'm doing a lot of different things besides patient care. So literally every day that I work is a surprise. And lately, I'm glad you put up that you discussed that piece of advice to take a break, because I'm guilty of that right now. I am working 7 days a week. Because my husband's schedule is also packed. So I'm thinking might as well get work done, go to work. And it's important to take that break for your mental health. Yeah. My boss told me, take a vacation. You need it. Do not bring your laptop with you. And I started to cringe, like, I can't not bring my laptop. He's like, no, I got this. I'm like, okay. So sometimes you have to take that break. And especially, listen to your coworkers, listen to your supervisors. It's important to put the work in. Yes. But it's also important to take care of yourself.
And I think that's maybe a military spouse thing, or anyone who works with a spouse that kind of goes in and out of really busy periods. When my husband graduated medical school and went into internship, he spent 18 months working at Walter Reed in Maryland. And I did the same thing as you. He was never home. I mean, it was just like 18-hour days. He worked every weekend, every holiday, he was gone. And I picked up work to fill the extra time. And it's really easy to get into that habit of you working all the time and it not being good for your own mental health. I mean, it's a nice default when you're like, I really need the distraction of not being bummed again that my husband is at work or has a crazy schedule. But you do have to build in time for yourself.
Yes. So important.
So if you had one piece of advice to give to a military spouse who is about to try to either navigate a career pivot or come back into the workforce after taking a break for a while, what would that be? What kind of advice do you have for spouses out there?
Be brave. Don't underestimate yourself. Put yourself out there and highlight your experiences, even if they're not work experiences. Everyone comes to the table with something in life. Highlight that and use it. And it also helps to have a good resume, a good cover page, and a good LinkedIn profile. A lot of employers are looking at LinkedIn to check out your experience and endorsements from colleagues or even friends. So I would say those few things. Be brave. You never know what's going to fall into your laptop.
That is the perfect thing to end this episode on. Thank you so much for sharing all of your unique experiences and all of your positivity. I know it will impact a lot of people.
My pleasure. And good luck to everyone out there looking for work, looking for career changes, education. Power to you. We are working our butts off. So props.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Our show is sponsored by Operation Freelance, a 501c3 nonprofit that helps military spouses, veterans, and caregivers break into freelance work. To learn more about that, visit www.operationfreelance.org. If you're looking to access show notes and more information about the guests you heard on today's show, please visit betterbizacademy.com.